Let's mutually suffer.
Good enough. Let's go ahead and try. Call it a solution. Yeah, so where I want to start, okay, so first of all, as a prelude to the exam next Thursday, I'll keep reminding you that so you don't write the exam. Let's say, for example, that you've never had this class. Okay? And I know some of you feel like that's. And ask yourself, if you were posed with the question of finding a mass transfer coefficient, how might you approach that? You don't need to look at your things. We're not going to go to what I did you there. I'm going to give the 11 answer. Okay, the one that is the thinking answer first, and then see if that's rather than recapitulate. So let's just say for a moment that we have a reactor using top box. Okay, and let's say we're trying to measure a gas-liquid interface. I didn't say it had to be oxygen. So if you chose some other thing, that's perfectly fine. I don't care what gas you chose. Okay. Oxygen is the typical one in the bio world because it's trying to do aerobic respiration. And let's say that you have this little picture in your head. Because you all know that when you start a chemistry problem, in the absence of anything else, what are the things you do? First, draw a picture. Okay. Second. No, that's third. That's third. Okay.
Mass balance.
Mass balance, right. Mass balance, right? Okay, so let's say this has a volume. Okay, within that volume, we know something's happening. But let's say we don't even know what's inside the reactor. Could we get the mass transfer coefficient in this reactor without even knowing what is in it? Is it a trickle bed? Is it a stirred tank? Is it a packed bed? I'm not going to tell you that. Okay, it is the infamous MV black box. Okay, okay. And if I was to look at that for a moment and say, well, within that volume, I know I'm going to divide by the volume because it's a volumetric mass transfer coefficient. It'll be somewhere in there, but let's not get too excited about that. Let's say that there's an inlet gas, and then there's an outlet gas, and that there's a flow rate between the two. Now, you might be like, am I going to say that there's a flow rate in, flow rate out? You could. You could also say that you know that most of the gas isn't going to react, so the flow rate's going to be about the same in and out. Take your pick. Okay, it doesn't really change the sort of look at this problem. But if you think about it, as a mass balance, what will be the difference between what comes in and what goes out?
Is this
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, that's kind of like the class. It doesn't have to be, though. I'm trying to get you the idea that you don't have to, just because it's biochemical engineering, it doesn't make any difference really than others. But let's just go with it and say that yes, it's a fermenter, something's inside there. or hopefully ferment can actually slice and root. We call it my reactor instead. But asking the question, what is the difference between what comes in and what goes out?
How much of the air goes into the liquid?
Hey, there you go. Okay, so is that kind of what we want to know? It is, right? I mean, I'm asking you the basic question here is what is the mass transfer rate? Okay, so the difference between what comes in and goes out of this must be what went across the interface. You can picture it however you want and say, well, there's here, that's liquid, and this is gas, right? Okay, and then say that's how it works. But that's, you might be like, well, that can't happen forever, right? Unless reaction. Right? In other words, it has to be going somewhere. Okay, and so in a sense, basically, I'm not going to do the accumulation equals in minus out and all that other crap. Okay, you guys can do that. It makes you feel good. That's part of it all the time. You can just kind of look at this and be like, okay, well, the difference. We'll just call it delta y for a moment, and we'll throw an f in front of it just to make sure we get units to work out here. The difference in what's going in and out. Or delta Fy. Okay. Must be equal to, well, that goes across the interface. Which must be equal to that which is being consumed, the reactor. Well, in this particular case, then, well, that's kind of not too hard to find out here. I want to do it on a volumetric basis, so let's divide by V. And the amount of mass transfer here is just KLA times a difference between what's at the interface and what's in the liquid. Well, if it's reacting, that goes away, so this is going to be equilibrium, called C star or equilibrium, choice, whatever, minus, well, that other one there, that if it's reacting, it's going away, okay, in the liquid phase, and there you go. I put the C equilibrium star under here, and I now have made myself an equation for the mass transfer function. Okay, so that's, without kind of going into the, memory mode. He told us something about like throwing something in there that causes a reaction, so on and so forth, and that. This is true. Now, you might then ask yourself, why isn't this little thing I showed you as a way to measure mass transfer? Because it is actually not the most common way to do this. Any thoughts on that? The answer is always money. Okay. Now you just need to make a connection between money and the right answer. It's actually kind of hard to measure gas phase concentration. It's not trivial. It's not easy. Okay. Especially not easy when you've got basically 21% oxygen in there, going there. What ways do we measure gas phase compositions? How did they do it on the reactor over there? In the pilot plant. We went on the tour. Here it is, right? There's a little propane on there. And I pointed out to him, I said, oh, are you using a time-of-flight mass spectrometer? Now, time-of-flight mass spectrometer sounds fancy. Time-of-flight mass spectrometer is basically, you can kind of think of it as your gas going into another box. Okay. And what happens is that it has things in it like nitrogen, oxygen, CO2, and so forth. And what I do is I put a big-ass magnetic field across this thing. And as they're trying to go over, depending on essentially their weight, if you will, they will be bent at different rates over there. And all I do is I just simply have a little collector here that is collecting the different gases by the number of these things that they contain. So I just ionize it, size, bam, hit it on there. The time-of-flight mass spectrometer is not fancy. It doesn't, you don't put things in here like complex chemical compounds and then it comes out like a chromatogram and all that other jazz. It just continuously reads how much crap is hitting it right here. That's it. Okay, so these were the industry standard forever on monitoring large-scale fermentation bioprocesses, which, so all you need is around 345K or so, and you can buy one of these things, and it will literally run for a gazillion years, because there isn't much, there's no moving parts, there's no injection, so on and so forth. These are kind of classic, if you will, process mass specs. Okay. Now, the ones that they have over there now the problem with it is they're expensive, and then you only have one of them. You have to multiplex the whole facility into one unit, and then that's how the old pilot plant was set up over in Viscous. You had 20 fermenters in there, and you could switch which one was getting its off gas time. This doesn't change a whole lot. The other thing that they were using here was just kind of, again, it was a diffusion probe, kind of like I mentioned, I think I mentioned dissolved oxygen probe works, where you basically have a voltage that you put across something here, and then you stick a membrane over it that the oxygen's diffusing through, and you're essentially reacting it away, and that sets up basically a gradient, a rate, if you will. One way to look at it is it reacts to 0, and if it's high oxygen concentration, it's a faster rate. So this kind of a diffusion-controlled reactive probe is how dissolved oxygen is measured in solutions, and now they've adapted them for gas-phase measurements as well. But it requires that you have measurements here that are reasonably accurate to get your well mass balance. Okay. So with that being the case, then, okay, this is, anyone like write down something? Anyone? What is another answer to this question that I didn't go over in class? Correlation. You could basically, I'll just try to look it up in a book. Okay. You look at it and say, like, well, it's a reactor about that size. It has an RPM going like that. Is this kind of an impeller in it? Probably the KLA is going to be pretty much the same every time. And that's generally true. Okay? We at least give you a ballpark of what it was. So all you need for looking up the correlation would you need to know the specifics of the reactor. Another one that I like, okay, so this one here, I'm not so sure what I'm giving on that one there. It could be like creative, okay, 8, okay, okay, just look it up, okay. Another one that I really like an answer, by the way, so there's 5 answers that I had on top of mine. What is the other one that I kept trying to emphasize that, it's kind of a pain in the rump to measure mass transfer coefficients, so what do we do? Measure heat transfer. Right, so another way of this is to remember the 2 famous dead guys, Chilton-Colburn, you're hired, okay. This is what you should have learned from your other class, not mine, okay. That you measure heat transfer coefficients and you can interconvert those to mass transfer coefficients. It turns out this does not work in this problem. Why does it not work? If you get why it doesn't work and you give that answer, then it's worth 15. It breaks a certain rule in the heat mass transfer world. Yeah, it's something about that specifically, so you're close. What specifically about it? Remember, thermal, at interfaces, you have thermal continuity. Temperature of this interface equals the temperature of the other interface, and you do measurements there. That's not true in this mass transfer world because, David said guy? Bingo. Okay, Henry's law. Okay, there's only so many dead guys out there, and we have to remember. Okay, we may have a final exam where it'll be a page of dead guys. Tell me what you know about these dead guys. Okay. There must be a dead girl in there, is there? Didn't get credit for it. Right, exactly. Okay, they would be better if they were. So the Henry's law thing means that you remember that whole interface thing, where I have 21% oxygen in air. I don't have 21% oxygen in water. Okay, so at that interface, when I have that equilibrium, we have that discontinuity that's defined by Henry's law. So that gas-liquid interfaces don't quite work like thermal interfaces, where you could say you have the laminates and all that jazz that you guys are doing, and then you did this, that. You could always say this interface is equal to that, number of unknowns, blah blah blah. And that gave you, all you needed was the thermal conductivities between these things, which is very unfortunate that it's K. Very unfortunate that K is everywhere. Okay? Reaction rate constants, we're going to experience this later in the course. It's like K is used for heat transfer, mass transfer, and reaction kinetics. And by the way, they all happen in the same problem. And so when you have a real problem, you've got 3 Ks, and they're all entirely different. And so given K, doesn't help you. It understand that. Okay, so get those 3. Overall mass balance. A correlation with the details where what happened here? Somebody took the data and they regressed it. Right? They took a whole bunch of data and then they just went ahead and then they stuck lines through it, curves through it, whatever they did. In fact, the wonderful world of engineering is if it's a curve, what do you do? How? It depends on the equation a little bit, but if you look in most of your engineering books, there's a classic thing that always seems to happen. Take a log of it. If you take the log enough times, okay, a line will become a weird curve will become a straight line. Okay, and so back in the dark ages, pre that, there used to be tons of semi-log paper, and all that kind of stuff. And if I handed out a piece of log paper now, you guys in minds would go, what's going on with this thing? Okay, one axis is log, the other one isn't, multiple decades, and say, hey, find me the mass transfer coefficient. Maybe like, what are you doing? Trust me, it's very useful if you don't, definitely. So, correlations based on experimental data. Chilton-Colburn analogy based on experimental data, but this is an interface mass transfer problem. That leaves the question of the 2 that I did mention. And so, 2 that I did mention, who wants to volunteer one of the 2? Okay. Doesn't want. Okay, there we go. Steady state. So steady state what? Well, there was 2. There was a dynamic and there was a steady state. 2 words that you've heard before. The key is the rest of the words. Okay. Steady state, something oxidation. Or sulfite is the reactant. Well, let's just call it reactant. Because that's a concept. You don't have to remember it's sulfite. Okay, careless. Steady state reactant oxidation, right? And if you wanted to draw a picture of this one of how it works, you start the thing all up. All you're doing is measuring the concentration of this reactant with time. And it looks like this. Okay. So we'll call it T. And at steady state, what does that look like, Cassandra? Okay. Good. Okay. It's going down because. Yeah. Good. Okay. Because it's reacting. Okay, right? Okay. And so if I want to translate the slope of it going down to the rate of transport of oxygen, what do I need? Nope, because the reactant in this particular case is batch, right? It's not flowing in anymore. Fancy word? Stoichiometry, right? Because this will give you here, this will give you the reaction rate. That tells you how fast you're reacting away whatever it is you're reacting. And I now need to relate that using stoichiometry. Will tell me how much oxygen I am. And once I know how much oxygen I'm reacting, now I know the mass transfer rate. I know my mass transfer coefficient. Dynamic. How's the dynamic work? Take a shot at it. See, while I point to show him and he's all nervous, you should be thinking, not thinking that you're not the one answering. Okay, it's not how it's supposed to work. Okay, and so how does this work? What is being measured? It all comes down to yeah.
Before we repeat basically all the oxygen and then the way in which it comes back. And it'll get it.
That's why it's called dynamic reaeration. Oh, I think I almost spelled that right. A-E-R-A-T-I-O. That's probably how aeration is spelled. Okay. Is it? You don't know. Okay, Google it. Okay, so dynamic reaeration is where you threw in a reactant. And okay, so let's say that it was here, and then when I threw in the reactant, I threw in a reactant with a very high reaction rate, so it just sucked the dissolved oxygen down to 0. And then it reacts away until it runs out. At this particular point where it runs out, then the dissolved oxygen comes back up. So here what I have in my reactor is I have a probe. It's a probe that is dissolved oxygen, the O probe, or dissolved oxygen probe. And I'm measuring the rate at which it comes back in after it reacts away. Okay. So fundamentally different from here. Here I'm not, the only thing I'm doing is I'm measuring the reactant going away. Okay. And here I need analytics on the gas phase concentrations in and out and so forth. And so there's a lot of different sort of options with it. And if you're a really good engineer and you were listening in my lab meeting last week, okay, what do you really do?
I was not at your lab meeting last
I know you weren't.
Okay.
You should have been.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. How about you? What is the key to being a good engineer? This is the opposite of what we teach you here. Reynolds. I keep telling you guys that it's like bonus points. My lab meeting is like heavy 401. Okay. You've been taught a lot about the idea of solving problems, where your objective is to find the number of equations and the number of unknowns, right? When I get them equal to each other, I have the answer, right? No, you have an answer. Okay, you don't necessarily have the correct answer, but you have an answer. Because you've been led to believe that number one, the equations are good, okay, and number two, that the measurements are good, neither of which is likely to be entirely true. Okay, and so the key to engineering is redundancy. Okay, you would like to be able to do something. How about go find correlation? And the correlation will give you a rough idea what your mass transfer might be for that type of reactor there. Then actually go and actually measure and see if that one is anywhere close to the one that you found in a book. Okay, now you're in the right ballpark of knowing in some degree of confidence that what you're working with is correct. And so you should always be looking for less unknowns. In fact, you want redundancy where you essentially have Yeah, there we go. The degree of freedom that is negative. Because that will assure you that you don't have to do, you're dealing with systematic error. Systematic, not propagation. Or something. Keep that here. And I agree with you through that. So anyway, this is. I've often heard like the greatest compliment of my class is Dr. Curtis didn't teach me anything. My kids love to read my.
Read my professor.
Yeah, that. Okay. Like, awesome. That's it. That's what I. Because that is not my goal. My goal is not to teach you a thing. It is to teach you to think, which is entirely different than teaching you a thing, because you will forget all the things that I might teach you. You might not forget how to teach or things. Okay, so let's go to where we left off last time. Okay. We were looking at impellers. Okay, so I think I did this. And then this. Okay, so we left off with the idea of impellers. The most important thing to understand about an impeller today is that once you define a physical impeller, a thing, all you really you now know how hard it is to turn that in a fluid. That is a power number. So what it means is that if I hand you an impeller and I tell you how fast I'm going to turn it, you can calculate how many horses you need to turn that impeller, how much power it's going to take, how big the motor is going to be, and all that kind of stuff from that. And so why that is true is what I'm going to go through in a piece of the analysis here. So we already talked about, finally, I think it took me only about 15 years to actually get the arrows in the right places here. Because every year I go like, oh shit, they're wrong again. Okay. Radial flow impellers, throw stuff radially. Okay. Axial flow impellers, throw things axially. Put this on a boat goes somewhere. Put this on a boat doesn't go anywhere. Okay. Unless turn it sideways and make a paddle. Okay. Okay. So these are the two fundamental designs. I mean, it's a little bit of a simplification because, when I am turning this, and depending on how much viscosity there is and so forth, it will still have a tendency to try to throw things sideways. But the reality is that when you have any degree of baffling in there, that baffling requires then that you lose your momentum that you're putting in circular like this and making it go up and down, and therefore you end up with multiple. So, why do we stir tanks? Okay. Back to you. Do you take the jacket off? Stay away.
To make the reaction go faster.
Yeah, I think, keep in mind that at the length scale of what we're accomplishing with mixing, molecular reactions take place at the kind of like individual molecule scale, whereas mixing, which is the reason why we stir things, happens at a much larger scale. So it's all about essentially mixing. Now, if you were to look at this now and going down the road here, what parameter would tell you essentially how intense the mixing is?
What do you mean by intense? Like how much?
I'm just telling you, throw something back at me. If you're
you
gonna
had like a gradient of like whatever it was.
No. I mean, like, you walk up to a tank. What are you gonna? And you're like, hey, is this mixed a lot or a little?
Bubbles. How fast it's going? Reynolds.
Okay. We'll get to you're showing your chemical engineering issue. Right? Yeah. Oh, what's the Reynolds number in your tank? There is such a thing. Okay. You probably would have something like way in the back there. Yeah, it's going way in the back. No. What parameter? A thing that you would say. RPM, yeah, something like how fast are you mixing it would be, because you would be like, yeah, if you're going like it's 10 RPM, that's kind of slow. And if I'm going 1,000 RPM, that's kind of fast, right? And that tells you. Now, is that enough? I guess my point is that just to walk up and ask yourself, is it enough to say the RPM is X? Can you have terrible mixing at high RPM? Yeah, you could have terrible mixing. Why? What circumstance would do that?
They usually just like tiny little
impeller, right? Exactly. So you have a teeny weeny impeller in there, you're really fast, okay? It doesn't actually mix it. So what I'm getting at here is the concept of the intensity of mixing. Obviously RPM is not enough. Okay? There's got to be something else to characterize this other than just that. Now, you can kind of say, well, if it was a bigger impeller run at that RPM, clearly it would be mixing better. And so ultimately, you can kind of then be thinking about it. Well, geez, it was really hard. It's easy to mix it when I had that teeny weeny impeller in there. And then you put a big one on the end, and it became really hard to mix it because it was harder to turn it around. Well, that's it. It's the energy. It's essentially power per unit volume. It's how much you're dissipating inside that thing that ultimately gives rise to that. And so I'm going to introduce, here's the Reynolds number for you, okay? Geek in the front row, I guess. It's rho venereal disease over mu, okay, is how you remember the Reynolds number. And it's how I do it, okay? But what is the actual velocity? Okay? That one, density, viscosity, diameter, impeller, that's all sounding good. And V, well, that would be like tip speed. Tip speed is proportional to and rotation rate times d. And so that gives you the power, the Reynolds number, rho and d squared mu, squared impeller. Okay. The other thing is this power number thing, which I'm not going to get into it just at the moment, but just think of this as a how hard is it to turn an impeller. Remember last time there was the impellers that were like this? The Rushtons? They're kind of hard. If I turn my thing sideways, it's now easier to turn, okay? So my power number just went down, power number went up, okay? So it's just how hard is it to turn. It's a characteristic of the physical impeller. Now, there's something a little counterintuitive about this, and I'll intend to go to the board as well. And I'm going to do it over here because I want to take a picture of that. Check out the notes. And I'm going to remind you of something that you've already known. Okay? Another famous thing back. I assume it's a thing back. What's that?
Yeah, these suck.
Yeah. I'm going to guess that Moody, you guys can wiki that later, okay? But what does this look like for real? Anyone remember the Moody chart, the Moody diagram?
Awful. There were a lot of lines. Yeah.
What was that?
There were a lot of lines.
A lot of lines in there. Really? Okay. There was only one line at
It was
first.
the log. Oh, that.
One line.
One was Laminar, right? And
Laminar.
then all the different
There you go.
turbulence and surface.
And then you had this thing, and then what was the other parameter that we needed in there for the additional roughness factor?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Was it a
roughness
pain?
factor. Yeah. And so it depended a little bit on that. So you guys vaguely remember what was going on here. What was the act on this axis here? Fanning friction factor. What is really a fanning friction factor? It's how hard it is to get crap down a pipe. Okay. you're going to see the analogy with how hard it is to turn an impeller, how hard it is to, it's all about that kind of thing. But it basically was a fanning friction factor here, which had to do with it. Now, on this axis here, no, back in.
Fell off. Reynolds number. There you go. Sorry, gotcha. That's part of it.
Okay. So, with that in mind, what does it mean when it gets flat? It's no longer dependent on it anymore.
Yeah.
Okay, so literally what it's saying here, now there's little variations on that because it depends on how slippery the pipe is. But it's really, when you look at this thing, what it's telling you is that once you get over here into turbulent, it doesn't matter how fast I am. It becomes independent of that. It's just as hard to push it down the pipe, whether you're at this flow rate or at this flow rate. That's literally what this diagram, with little corrections for how slippery the pipe is. I'll bring this back to that. What is happening here, these are also referred to as viscous and inertial. Okay? Inertia, viscous is easy to think about. When it's more viscous, it's kind of harder to turn craft. Okay? Okay? Inertial, we also sign to understand, it's kind of like getting out of bed, going to PCAM. Okay? Probably not.
Just one.
Okay. At this point in time, and my analogy for this, when I teach flows, is just think of it this way. Okay? We're all going to go to the swimming pool, and we're all going to start by diving off the diving board. We're going to start at 5 meters. Okay. Everybody's going to jump in the water. Okay, then we're going to go to, up to the 10 highest one unless you're here 10 meters and okay, so. What's the difference? It hurts. Okay, that's the big difference. The big difference between jumping off there. What if I go to jump out of a plane? Now it really hurts.
You don't feel like more. Yeah.
And it really does not matter because what happens is that the fluid is no longer functionally a fluid. It's just inertia. You get it out of the way. When you're diving in there and it's viscous entry, and then you slide into the water. Okay. When you jump out of the airplane and hit the water, it's cement, because it will not get out of the way. The Reynolds number is so high, okay, that it may as well be cement because it cannot get out of the way in a viscous way. It's just a big chunk of water needs to displace to let your body get in there. Okay, it's like a rock. Okay, so it's mushy too. Okay, so this is a characteristic that you will see again and again in the world of. And it leads to very counterintuitive thinking, because you would think that if I have an impeller and I am going to mix something that is more viscous, that it would make it harder to turn and its power number would change. But it doesn't, because you've already entered that thing where I'm throwing rocks out of the way, big hunks of fluid. Okay? Does it really matter whether it has a higher viscosity or not? It doesn't, because it's become an inertial flow situation.
Wouldn't it make it harder to start it up though? Like would there be consideration
Well,
with that?
Because you're down here and it's viscous.
Okay.
So when you're still in the
that
viscous
region,
world, you are, but in the laminar, you're not. Now, the overhead that I have in my notes this time for you is to look at all of this stuff here. Here is again and again and again different things. Okay. So up there's the fanning friction factor, resistance to putting craft down a pipe, Reynolds number here. This is impellers. Looks kind of similar, doesn't it? Okay. It is laminar on this end. It's viscous out here. This is the drag coefficient for little particles sedimenting down through objects and so forth, sedimentation equation. Okay. Where are we operating in the world of mixing? We are operating out here. We are in the turbulent. We don't mix things with the intention of them being viscous. Okay? except for those weird little videos where they draw their name in it and then they turn the impeller super slow and it disappears and then they reverse it and you can read it again. Okay, that's not being mixed, and that's not why you buy an impeller. Okay, you buy an impeller to mix, since you're way over here into the turbulent region. Therefore, up there, the power number up there is constant. The difficulty, the degree of difficulty in actually turning that impeller is a function of its physical geometry. How it scoops it and tosses the crap out of the way, because it does not matter what the viscosity of that is, because you're in the turbulent regime. And the power number is not going to be dependent on viscosity. So you can look at these things in terms of functional dependencies, and you'll notice that viscosity is missing. Okay. Well, it should be missing because it's not dependent on the actual viscosity at that point. So, where do you get the power number for an impeller? Look it up. Because if I build impellers and I'm going to sell you one, I'm going to measure its power number and I'm going to tell you what it is, so you know how many horsepower it is to buy your motor and all that other kind of jazz for the actual mixing and so forth. And it's just a number. Sounds arbitrary, but the Russian impeller is almost equal to the number of little fins you put on it. Power number of 6 if there's 6, 5 if there's 5. Get to the little axial flow in elephant ears, it's about 1.8, 2, something like that. It's a number. So, from here you can go the whole way to really designing something. You can ask yourself, do I want it to be mixed? What's a reasonable RPM? I could go the whole way and say, I don't want to kill the cells, so I need my eddy length to be bigger than this. I need my power per volume to be that, and that gives me power. Once I know power, I can get from that my actual RPM and my impeller type that'll tell me how big to put on a reactor that won't kill my cells. That to me is designed for an actual bioreactor as opposed to designing for next time we'll go into bringing the gas into the thing. So you'll notice we sort of like left the gas out at this point. So we're going to have to bring it back in so our bugs don't suffocate. Next Thursday. No. It's going to be in the evening, and it'll become really like I set it up for 8 o'clock, and then you can come if you have conflicts, whatever, up until 10 or whatever, and you can finish when you finish. I don't make it a timed exam in the sense that like I'm not don't know yet.
You took this like 20-minute break.
Yeah, I did. I got up to a point and I was like, hey, I'm going to pee. I just walked around there.
Thursday morning, so